Sperm banks operating in universities in China are looking to university students for donations. But not just anybody can sign up. A donor should not be bald and must be over 170 centimeters in height, and that's about 5 feet 6 inches. This is part of efforts by the Chinese government to counter the country's falling birth rates. For more on the country's population decline, we turn to Professor James Raymo from Princeton University. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. China's population recorded negative growth for the first time in 61 years last year. And there are many indicators that show that the population in China is on the decline. What are the main reasons driving this phenomenon?
Well, the main reason is really quite simple. The main reason is low fertility over an extended period of time. How do you end up in a situation where you have more deaths than births if you don't have a lot of migration? Well, it's because you have shrinking numbers of women in prime childbearing age, and that's the result of a long period of very low fertility. This is the same as is the case in Japan, the same as the case in South Korea, and in many other countries with declining populations.
Right, it is indeed a vicious cycle. Now, It is, you're right. And what societal issues are there to be expected from such a dramatic population decline then? For Korea, for instance, is also struggling, like you said, with a low birth rate and an aging society. But I think China could be a different story considering the size of the country and also the economy itself.
Right. That's a very good question that keeps demographers, policymakers, journalists busy. And I think the reason is that the potential consequences are really quite broad. I think that many of the consequences that are salient in South Korea or elsewhere, Japan, are the same in China. How do you support a growing elderly population when you have fewer people in the prime working ages paying taxes in a pay-as-you-go sort of support scheme for pensions and health care? That's very difficult. Labor shortages are another issue that will be very salient in the Chinese context. I think that two reasons to your question why China may be a little bit different is the fact that unlike Japan, South Korea, or other developed countries, China does not have a very well-developed universal healthcare and pension program. There are many people in the large rural areas of China that aren't well covered by this. And to the extent that aging population means less money to support these programs, well, presumably the burden falls on families. And families are shrinking, meaning that there is more burden placed on fewer family members. So this is just one example. I think urban-rural differences and dying rural areas as outmigration, which of course we know to be a big issue in China, rural China in particular, leaves fewer and fewer younger people in rural areas to have children, form families and have children. You have increasingly older populations, and these populations at some point disappear.
Right, rural areas. Now, China is implementing and applying new measures to tame the newly emerging struggle, like the sperm donation, and also local governments ending the ban on unmarried couple having children. Do you think, Professor, measures like this will help the country overcome population headache? What do you think?
That's a very easy question to answer.
Okay.
No. No, I do not. And I think the main reason is the following. So if we think about removing a ban on non-marital childbearing, if we think, under what circumstances would that lead to an increase in fertility? Well, a basic circumstance would be that there are women who are not having children outside of marriage because of this ban. And based on everything I know about China, I think there are very, very few women in that position. Certainly there may be women, and increasingly there may be women who desire to have children outside of marriage. But I would suggest that that number right now is quite low. And I doubt that there are that many people who would respond to a change in policy around the feasibility of non-marital childbearing. This is very similar to policy efforts in other countries. We've mentioned Japan and South Korea already, to give money to couples to facilitate family formation. We know that doesn't really work very well either. And ultimately, it comes down in a place in almost all of East Asia, I would argue, where non-marital childbearing is essentially zero. It's not zero, but it's close. The real issue in a context like that is, how do you promote family formation? How do you promote marriage? And I would argue that a lot of that has to do with the difficulties of balancing work and family for women, the difficulties of meeting expectations to be the primary breadwinner for men in a difficult economic circumstances. And I think those are the more effective policy targets, but certainly they're the more difficult policy targets too. It's easy to remove a ban on non-marital childbearing. It's easy to give money to couples. It's a lot harder to facilitate work-family balance.
Right. Lots of interesting and desperate policies and measures being rolled out. We'll have to keep an eye on those, how they go on.
Absolutely. It's the same issue faced by many different countries. Right now, Japan is the oldest country in the world, experiencing the largest annual decline. Very soon, they will be overtaken by South Korea. And if projections are correct, very soon after that, South Korea will be overtaken by China as the most rapidly declining population in the world.
Right. All right, Professor, thank you so much for your insight this morning and evening for you.
My pleasure. Thank you.